Welcome, my fellow wilderness wanderers, into this second Sunday in Lent in the year of our Lord 2021. Attend the gospel, the good news. Then he began to teach them that the Son of Man must undergo great suffering and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. He said all this quite openly, and Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning and looking at his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." He called the crowd with his disciples and said to them, "If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it. And those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. For what will it profit them to gain the whole world and forfeit their life? Indeed, what can they give in return for their life? Those who are ashamed of me and of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of them the Son of Man will also be ashamed when he comes in the glory of his Father with the holy angels." Mark chapter 8, verses 31 through 38. What cross? I recall the very first encounter I ever had with a corpse. My father and mother dressed my brother and me in the kind of clothes reserved for special occasions. Church-going clothes, we once called them. They were starchy and uncomfortable, but they suggested something significant requiring decorous behavior and impeccable manners. Solemnly and quietly, we drove to a single-level building along North Lang Avenue in Pittsburgh. I would later come to understand that this was the place my father would always call out by name whenever he good-naturedly traded threats and jousted with acquaintances and friends who dared to play the dozens with him. Keep it up. One of these days, you'll be laid out at Spriggs and Watson. He always said it with gusto to emphasize that dread consequence for anyone laid out at Spriggs and Watson's. I had been too young to grasp the full meaning of my father's jests, but on this particular day when my mother wore black and my father donned a dark suit, I began to sense something eerie and uncanny was unfolding to envelop the day and to overshadow us with an odd and inexplicable air of doom. We ascended the 4 or 5 steps to the entrance of the brownstone building, and the glare of the brilliant sun outside was instantly dimmed by heavy drapes at the windows inside. There were soft-lit lamps placed here and there throughout the room that we had entered. I had not yet noticed the long wooden box raised above the floor as though floating on a curtain of its own. But then I observed how every adult in the room, with hushed tones, greeted each other in an earnest air of, "I'm so sorry for your loss." Each person, the women clutching their purses and the men holding their fedoras against their chests, did so with a nod in the direction of the well-polished box, and suddenly I was standing there, my mother holding me by the hand as she looked down into the velvet-lined interior. My father stood near her, just behind her shoulder, his hands clasped behind him as he studied the form within. Silently, reverently, they considered what lay before them. I could hear my mother expel a low-keyed sound, wordless but deeply meaningful all the same. She took in a breath And when she exhaled, I could hear the long, that betokened quiet resignation in the acceptance of something inexorably real, implacable, and definitive. She held me up so I could see while my brother Rick buried his face in our father's pants leg. There she lay, as still as a slab of marble, the lady of robust build and a kinder smile that I had always loved to visit. Cousin Maggie had died, and Mom and Dad had decided that this was the death through which my brother and I would come to be introduced to that grim specter. As I looked on Cousin Maggie, I watched for some sign of movement, some hint of breath, a slight rise and fall of her blouse, a twitch of her finger as it gripped her glasses. I asked my mother if she were asleep, though it was passing strange that she should choose to sleep in a box with her Sunday go-to-meeting clothes on and in so public a space where folks just seemed to come and to go. My mother told me that Cousin Maggie would not wake up again except to awake in heaven. She said that Cousin Maggie had died and that this was what death looked like. I was frankly too unbelieving to agree with what my mother had told me. How does one hug and kiss, butter bread, laugh, cry, play, eat, sleep, and rise again, as we do from day unto day and from night unto night, only to come to this end, this senseless oblivion, this soundless, airless annihilation? Not long after this shocking incident, I remember brushing my teeth as my mother had taught me to do each morning. I rinsed and looked into the mirror. I stared for a long time at my reflection, and with an effort of great zeal, I vowed never to die. I thought that if I just concentrated hard enough, I could prevent it from happening, that I could escape Cousin Maggie's fate. Somehow, I thought, she had let her guard down. Had she been more attentive, she might still be alive to wipe the running noses of children who played outside her house, to bake a cake so moist it would melt just to taste it. I had been convinced that her life had been so full that I could not fathom that it now was over, done, and finished. So let us bring in the gospel now, right here at the close of my childhood resolution. Jesus confided openly with his disciples that great trauma and death was ahead of him at the hands of the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes. He saw a cross looming ahead on an invisible horizon. He may not have been so specific as to the means of his death, but he was unblinking in his conviction that he would be killed, murdered at the hands of authorities as yet undetermined. He was clear that he would be rejected by the religious authorities of his own people, and that death would come in the wake of that rejection. This teaching was exceedingly disturbing to his disciples, and Peter would not have any of it. In a moment of private counsel, Peter rebuked Jesus for this dark talk of repudiation and premature death. Can we blame Peter? I, for one, do not blame him at all. I hear him clearly in words that might just as well have been my own. Why are we following you, Jesus? If all that comes of it is the brutal rebuff, the back of the hand, in the stinging humiliation of death, why must we countenance this vile and ugly outcome after the miracles we have seen, and after the healings and feedings we witnessed, and after the raising of the lame and the halt, and even the dead? We have not followed you all this way to watch it all come to naught, to view the spectacle of death in triumph over life. Stop this talk of dying now. There is no profit in it. But Jesus will not relent. And if anything, he tightens the knot that is the crucifixion to come. First, Jesus assails Peter as though he were the tempter he had resisted when he had been in the wilderness nearly 3 years ago. Get behind me, Satan. What he says next, he says to all, for he calls the crowd along with the disciples. Don't look away. I know you're tempted to. Don't shift your weight and stop blinking. He's talking to thee and to me. We are the crowd that he addresses now. If any want to be my followers, let them deny themselves. This is not Peter, this is me. Hold on 1 minute. I'm here for the feast. I'm here to let the good times roll. I want to eat well, drink my fill, and dance to that fresh blues lick that pierces the air. I'm not in the mood for self-denial. But Jesus is not finished. He then insists that we take up our crosses and follow him. Crosses? What crosses? Pray tell. And there's the rub. Let me remind you. Let me remind you right here that the Roman Empire was manufactured out of grisly, gruesome death. The hideous spectacle of public crucifixion kept the outlanders in order and maintained the Pax Romana, the peace according to Rome. It was in the terrifying witness of so savage a death that most stout-hearted contender to Roman authority, even he would lose his nerve to see it, to look upon it. That Jesus would point to this instrument of earthly torture as the image of what we must bear to follow him must take our breath away. This is not just the horror of death, but the horripilating monstrosity of agony besides. Preaching this Jesus is not easy. Preaching this Jesus is facing down our deepest, most abject fears. Our fear of failure, our fear of pain, and our fear of suffering, our fear of scorn and our fear of humiliation, our fear of lovelessness and our fear of injustice, our fear of meaninglessness, and finally, our fear in the face of death. Preaching this Jesus is hard because the life he asks us to confront fearlessly is itself hard, brutal, often nasty, and for too many, short and solitary. I have seen injustice face to face, and it always wants me to cower and to shrink away. It tells me that if I want to live, I'll accept the way things are. Ugly, vile, and stupid. I have seen hunger stare me in the face from the face of my neighbor. Something in me says to be satisfied, to do what I must, not to be hungry myself, even if others must starve. But I feel my spirit within me shrink and dry up like a raisin in the sun, and I know that my living will come to nothing if I cannot feed the hungry clamoring for bread right outside my door. I feel the cross of it dig into my shoulders like splintered wood. I see children ripped from their mother's arms and held captive in cages until the dark night of self-abnegation takes root in them to make them wish they were dead. I cannot abide this comfort of mine to say unto myself how grateful I am to be so blessed that it was not me instead. Oh, there but for the grace of God go I, we love to say. What a monster this makes of God. What a monster it makes God out to be, that God would choose favorites from among us in this corrupted and immoral way. I think the better theology is that God is calling to you and to me to redeem those who suffer, to set at liberty those who are captive, and to comfort those who are afflicted, and to assure the loveless that they, after all they have been through that threatened to crush them into nobodiness, that they are nonetheless somebody and that they are loved. Why do you stand there asking, what cross? Why, the cross for you to bear is there in your own home. It's there in your neighborhood and there in your town. I should think that it is enough for now. Those crosses, for Jesus has already taken on the cross of the whole world to face the grim reaper down. I think I understand why my mother and father took me and my brother to see Cousin Maggie, whom we loved, stretched out in mortal repose. She was composed, serene, and even comely in that settled kind of way that those who lived well will sometimes disclose when they die well. Can it be that is what Jesus meant when he said that those who lose their lives for his sake will save them? The world is not just, my friends. It is often vicious and full of hate. There are people in it who seek to dominate others. There are others still who are selfish and even avaricious to their core. Some are spiteful, full of envy, and poisoned with self-glorification to the point of offending and grieving the Lord. I want to avoid the trap of walking away from this fallen world, lest I trip over myself in the attempt to spare myself. Rather, I believe you and I should take Jesus' wise imperative to heart. Let us be joined in the struggle to make the world more inhabitable for all God's creatures, all of them, all of them. Come with me and wrestle to bring beauty for ashes and joy over sorrow. Let us fight the cause of justice until the moral arc of the universe bends in its direction. But even if you fail to heed this call, I will suffer the barbs and bricks of mine enemies, to love them away from hatred's tight-fisted hand. I shall work and labor and even slave to bring light to dispel the darkness. And if I cannot do it all, I will die trying.